Welcome back to Magus in the Media. I'm joined today by Collin Conkwright of American Esoteric. This conversation is one that unfolds beautifully. We started in Hermeticism, but it moved through initiation, Freemasonry, Universalism, American religious history, what spiritual responsibility actually looks like right now, and much, much more. We begin with the Poimandres, the opening treaty of the Corpus Hermeticum, and what the visionary experience is describing. We approach it as something lived and experiential, a text that points towards ascent, remembrance, and an obligation that follows with a real encounter with the divine. From there, the question becomes, what is initiation? Does it require an institution? Can it happen alone? We talk about Freemasonry as a living symbolic system. We wrestle with universalism and perennial philosophy. We step into the debate around whether America was ever meant to function as a Christian nation, and what the founders were actually doing when they rejected establishment churches. And at a certain point, it turns inward. The warrior's path, breath, discipline, participation. What I appreciate about this conversation is that it didn't stay abstract. It kept coming back to lived experience, to the ideas that tradition only truly matter if it transforms you. We're living in strange times, but human beings have always lived through strange times. Now, the difference is whether we remember what has already been discovered and whether we're willing to do the work ourselves. And if you're enjoying these kinds of conversations, subscribe, like, and share it with somebody else who would as well. This is Magus in the Media. Settle in for this conversation and let's begin. And welcome back, everyone, to Magus in the Media. We are going deep in this one today. I have the great Colin of American Esoteric. He is a YouTube philosopher, Freemason, brilliant man who is putting out amazing video essays and information on the philosophic, the mystic, the magical, and the Western esoteric tradition. Thank you for joining me today, Colin.
Brandon, thank you for having me on. I'm excited to see what we get into.
I am definitely as well, and so should everybody else. So what I like to do is I like to kind of lead us all into who you are, Colin. So if you could just give me a little bit of who you are, why you are, and how you got into this ocean of chaos.
Haven't figured out the why just yet, but that is the lifelong quest there. Yeah, so, I had a number of experiences in my late teenage years that pretty much altered the trajectory of my life into definitely a more spiritual and scholarly direction. I chose not to go to college, because of this, and plunged deep into the source text, into the translations. Like the spirit of comparative religion sort of took me over, and I didn't necessarily have a good mentor or anything to sort of start out with. So there was a lot of early years of just fumbling through it all and trying to figure it out. But it was extremely exciting, and sort of, nothing can capture that, like, those early investigative years where you're doing a lot of pattern matching and you're picking up errors that later you're disabused of. You know how it goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, just plunged into the literature, and meanwhile, there was always these parallel experiences going on that were just essentially confirming, reality is more mysterious than we have been led to believe. Right. And it seems like this is nothing new. It's the new thing is rather that we're programmed out of that, that enchantment. Right. We're programmed out of it by this kind of factory society, all of these different elements that coincide to make us less, to make life feel less wonderful for whatever reason. So we have to remind ourselves. So I kind of early on developed a sour taste for institutions, possibly a little too sour, but that's a whole nother thing we could get into. But yeah, man, there was a lot of experiences, a lot of great learning. Surrounded myself with people that were kind of on a similar trajectory, and we would go late into the night, hours and hours, deep flow state conversations, just learning as much as I can. And through that journey, I amassed a fair amount of knowledge, but kind of the people I could discuss this with kept sort of dropping off, and there was these moments of isolation. So now it's really cool to be able to meet more people, especially online, who are deep into this stuff, make new friendships. So I hope that answers at least a little bit of your question.
It's a great answer. It's a great answer. And I think not only myself, but a lot of people out there feel very similar to you. But then the question is, what is the literature? What is the major texts or books that were your first big explosions of the mind?
Yeah, I would say the Poimandres, the first treatise in the Corpus Hermeticum, that is like, I sort of, I go back to that every year, at least once or twice. It's kind of like a personal study text for me, because I really think, if you had nothing else in the Corpus Hermeticum, a lot of people would disagree with this. If I could just keep the Poimandres, I would, because I think it's very clear whoever the initiate is, let's just say it's Trismegistus, right, is having this out of body experience, discussing, the mysteries of reality, getting a lot of information from Poimandres, from the voice of sovereignty. The different translators title it differently, but there are a lot of elements in there that really spoke to me, just my personal experience. So I would always put that up there. And then, learning about the different initiatic schools, like the Pythagoreans, of course, all of the different mystery traditions, and then those initiates like Apuleius, who would come out and kind of give us more insider details onto what was happening there, Strabo and so forth. They will describe what's going on in the mysteries, and there's like all these different angles that essentially, in different ways, they're producing a state of being in the candidate through, music is coming over here, the chants are going on over there, the dramatic ceremonial performance is happening right here. And just like in Masonry, the initiate is sort of circumambulating through all of these different, symbolic experiences, until there's this concrescence of things. There's this, this crowning moment, which I do believe, at least for a while, was a legitimate experiential moment, and not necessarily just a sort of symbolic or allegorical, right? So learning about all of those different traditions where people were getting initiated, there are these rites of passage, and I feel like we've lost a little bit of that. So just being able to see that was fundamental to a lot of these ancient cultures was a profound moment for me.
Yeah, I completely agree. Then can you, since the Pymander was one of your big explosions and wealth of knowledge for you, can you give me and the audience a little breakdown of what the Pymander is?
Ooh.
Yeah.
So we don't necessarily know who it is, but let's just assume it's Hermes Trismegistus, is kind of outside of the temple, by himself. And while he is wandering on the mysteries of nature, and his contemplation is raised high, there seems to be a kind of hypnagogic state that he's in, almost like he's falling into sleep or something close to it. And this voice comes to him, and I interpret it as it's kind of, he's clearly leaving. So I interpret it that he's leaving his body in this moment. And he essentially goes on this journey with Poimandres, who some people describe him as like a dragon-like figure. That's not really in the text itself. That's taken on a kind of mythology of its own. But this figure, comes forth with this blazing light. So Hermes is having this. He's actually seeing this being, before his eyes in this kind of astral realm. And they essentially go on this dialogue back and forth. He's shown a cosmology. He's shown an anthropogeny, basically the beginnings of the cosmos and humanity, right? And there's this moment where the first man. So it's different than sort of Genesis and what have you, where you might say, you know, Adam fell, and there was this tragic moment of sin that sort of led him to be cast out of the garden. It's different in that there's this love affair. The first androgynous soul is kind of hovering above nature and looks down and falls in love with nature, and through that, you know, the human race is born, and so on. And yeah, what follows is a dialogue on kind of the mysteries of the soul and nature. The seven spheres are sort of classified, which in different respects become the kind of the seven planetary spheres. And you know, as the soul ascends, they're kind of casting off one garment here, one garment there, which are different vices, you know, depending on the interpretation. So it's just an all around. It's got everything in there, and it's a very complete text. And then right at the end, one of my favorite parts is this call to action. So you know, Poimandres says, now that you've been, you know, shown and sort of saved, if you will, should you not go on and spread the word, right? So there's this kind of, I don't want to call it evangelical, but there's this call to action that Hermes shouldn't just sit on this vision and keep it to himself, but he should go ahead and spread it around. And not everyone is going to pick up on it. People are going to turn away and scoff. But those few who do come, those are the ones you need to teach. And those kind of fulfill the reason why you had this experience in the first place.
Nice. Yeah. That's beautiful. That's almost very similar to, like, right in the Bible, they say, do not cast pearls before swine, or how Christ told his disciples or his apostles that, you know, I speak truth to you, but to everyone else, I give allegory, or, you know, I'm kind of paraphrasing that. It seems to be very similar. Do you think, like, when do you think this text was written, the Pymander?
You know, that is such a debated situation. But I kind of think it's relatively low stakes, the sort of when it happened. For me, that's low stakes, but a lot of people really like to focus on that as if it's this higher stakes thing. What I think is, you know, so I mean, it's probably not later, definitely not later than the 3rd century, right? I would put it in the 2nd century easily, but we don't know if it's someone copying something that was earlier. You know, we're missing all of those details, which this is part of the, you know, like, I love nerding out on the Hermetic investigation, where it all comes from, because there's always been this debate, you know, since the 17th century, with Isaac Casaubon and all these other characters who were kind of bringing the date of the Corpus Hermeticum forward, you know, through their philological research and so on. And that, for a lot of people, like, delegitimized the knowledge in Hermetica, which to me, I think that's a mistake, to just, depending on when it's dated, you know, then it's all out. And he also, Casaubon, thought it was like Christian forgeries. You know, I don't think there's a strong argument for that either. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But anyway, I would say, you know, the broad window I'm very comfortable putting the Corpus Hermeticum in is like 2nd century BC through 2nd century AD, because there were Hermetica, you know, even Manetho, I believe a 2nd or 3rd century Egyptian priest, even he mentioned a plethora of writings under the name Hermes Trismegistus. So, you know, we don't have those, right? We don't necessarily have all of those writings. And so I think it's silly to say, from the dates of the writings we do have, none of the ones before that ever existed. Well, not really, because Plutarch, Diodorus Siculus, all these different sources are mentioning that they do exist. And then we get, you know, Clement of Alexandria in the 2nd century showing us a contemporary Hermetic priesthood. It might have even been the priesthood of Isis, but he seems to describe it in more of the way, like, these are it's a procession of the Hermetic priesthood, if you want to call it that. Everyone's going to quibble about, you know, which terms you can use here.
Yeah.
But each of the people in this procession are carrying one or another textbook on the different, you know, arts and sciences of the time that are all authored by Hermes. Now, so even at this point, it is kind of in the background that, of course, one man named Hermes didn't author all of these. That's kind of kind of improbable, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, when you understand Thoth and the Thoth cult and everything else, you don't just, when they're attributing a writing to Hermes Trismegistus, that's kind of similar to what a more ancient Egyptian would just attribute it to Thoth. So it's this inspirational honorific, right? And I think it has something to do with the state of being of the author, and that there was this. They probably kept it a little under wraps. If the author gets in a particular kind of state of being, that allows them to say that this is authored by Hermes Trismegistus, right? It would have to align with some of the other material already existing there, and to make it official, you would have probably had to have had some kind of formal role in whatever school, cult, priesthood actually existed there. When it comes to the Egyptian Hermetic cult, the Greco-Egyptian Hermetic cult, it's like we're always sort of reaching for shadows because we don't get this really solid thing there. But it makes it fun, and it opens up a lot of room for investigation. But like, as the investigation continues, where I stand is that it's clearly pointing to, this is a carryover from a well-developed, Thoth cult tradition of ancient Egypt that just had to adopt and adapt as the Persians, the Greeks, and all these other communities, all these different people were coming into Egypt, especially during the Alexandrian primacy there. So there was clearly this adoption and adaptation because Alexander the Great comes in. There was already the Persians there. There was already people traveling from far and wide. Then when Alexandria comes up, that amplifies. There's all of these different, religious worldviews commingling around this time, and we could kind of see the Hermetica as being like the people who thought they were keeping to the Egyptian tradition, saying, this is part of our tradition, in the face of all of these other religious aspects coming. It was kind of like the last, stamp of what the ancient Egyptian religion was. Now that's a tricky one. Like, I don't want to plant that flag too hard. I get that there's those like Platonic, Neoplatonic elements in there, possibly some sort of among the Gnostic communities and whatnot. Like, because there's the Son of God motif throughout Hermetica that was really prevalent. It was kind of this archetypal thing. It didn't always mean Jesus per se, but it was an archetype that was shared around the Eastern Mediterranean.
That's nice.
Yeah.
That's good for people to know that Son of God motif isn't just one straight up archetype or man that came from, right, Judea, Bethlehem, in the Middle East there.
Yes. Yeah. And, early Christianity arises, like there's a substrate of religious attitudes from which early Christianity arises. And the early Christians, they can't just sever all of those ties. So all of those strands are still there. They're like vines always adorning this sort of moving statue of early Christianity. And then it takes on, this is what everyone's forgotten, right? It takes on all these different shapes and forms. There's a bunch of different Christianities bracketing out. And then as, the church and as Rome starts solidifying what dogmas they're going to use, not necessarily banning texts or anything, but just saying these are the texts that we now adopt as canon, right? The more that process went on through the ecumenical councils of Nicaea, then you start getting, okay, this group is these are heretics here. These ideas are heretical ideas there, and as you get these stricter dogmatic interpretations, then I think it kind of all becomes confused, and the Christian populace starts losing those earlier strands of these other religious attitudes, right? For instance, I'll show this to you because I'm imagining you're a book nerd like myself. I just read this the other day, The Revelation of the Magi, And
Beautiful.
it's like the first English translation of a second century apocryphal Christian text,
Nice.
and it's kind of it's expanding or innovating on the magi who came to Jesus, right when he was born, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's another very bizarre sort of strain of Christianity right there in the beginning. And they're describing a larger group of magi coming in from the east, possibly as far as China. It seems like the author is trying to get at.
Wow.
You don't necessarily know exactly where they're coming from, but as far as the Son of God archetype goes, the star that the Magi follow to Bethlehem is kind of like this orb or this pillar of light, and it comes down, and there's various different forms and beings kind of taking shape within this light, and it brings them into a cave, and it instructs them in what is about to happen and the journey that they have to make to see the Son of God get born. And each of the different magi in this cave have a different vision of what is coming out of this light. So they all leave the cave with like a different vision of what has happened. They also eat the provisions that are provided by this Son of God, this effulgent light. And they kind of start tripping balls and having these visions. You don't necessarily know, is this a psychedelic? Like we're not, no one is ever going to really know.
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating, like very experiential text. And though it's apocryphal and possibly forged, etc., it does rely on an even earlier kind of story. So that's interesting. And from their descriptions, they're describing they seem to be actually having these experiences through how they describe them, right? Through how they describe the visions, the fact that each one of them is remembering the visions differently. That happens with modern day UFO phenomena. I've
Definitely.
Yeah. So that's there. That seems to indicate that, okay, they knew about something, right?
Yeah.
So that's just one example of all of these different attitudes that still they kept Jesus in them, but they might attach some Platonism over here. They might attach some esoteric Judaism right there, some Hermeticism over there. Wherever you found the Christians in the early world, there was these streams of the other religious attitudes, still attached onto it, right?
Yeah, that's
So
beautiful.
it's fascinating to try to parse those out and just explain to modern Christians how it wasn't just this clean cut, here's the biblical text and everything. There was a lot of other movements going on. Yeah. Cool stuff.
And that's cool because it kind of brings in then why the Gnostic ideals of the aeons is really important, because then the Christos is known as a aeonic force that comes down into our world and inhabits basically like maybe the idea that Christ isn't so much as a set figure one man that was in that area, but the Christos, more of a Philip K. Dick kind of way, is like this hyperplasmate that he talks about that then inhabits somebody's nervous system. And then through certain practices, they turn on this kind of higher transcendent level of being. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's Jesus is a huge mystery, and the historical Jesus is kind of, we will never really understand who the historical Jesus actually was, but that's always a fascinating question. Did he travel to Alexandria, and what, like, how literate was he? Did he understand other religions? You get on the most sort of extreme sides, you get like the Edgar Casey perspectives, how Jesus traveled into India and all of these other things, had multiple reincarnations, and then on the other extreme, Jesus is just this common, like, criminal messianic figure who was just crucified. We should forget about him. It's like it's probably not any of those, but whatever it is, I'm sure, like, I do believe the historical Jesus existed.
Yeah.
And
I do too.
I think we should try to figure out what that was, even though
Yes.
it's sort of hopeless, but we might be able to figure out some things. not what he's become, like all of, in all of the different 30,000 headed hydras that have been created.
Yeah, that's a good way of stating it. I've always really enjoyed the ideal of how the logos from Kether, of that Ein Sof, the limitless light, kind of sends its lightning bolt bits of information into that Tiperethic sun force, that sun center of the tree of life, and then how it expands itself. And the reason we see one figure as the Son of God is because we kind of we need to kind of have that anthropomorphized figure so we can see the path being walked type of ideal. But then we all need to walk our own path of the magician to be able to ignite our own inner Tipereth, our own inner sun force. So we are all as he said, we are all the sons and daughters of God.
Yeah, I think without that, I don't think Christianity actually has a future unless it adopts the understanding, unless it adopts, let's just call it the democratization of the Christ consciousness, unless it is sort of, this opportunity is also available to you. I mean, there are modern apologists that are literally saying you can be as evil as you want, but as long as on your deathbed you proclaim Jesus as your savior, you're going to be all right.
Yeah, which is
and these guys are like, these guys are celebrated. It's like, okay, so y'all just want to convert as many as possible. That's really what you're saying, whereas I believe, like Paracelsus said, faith without works is dead. So I think beautiful. You could, the opinionated dogmas are always the weakest, low stakes things that there are, right? Someone who's never heard about your dogmatic religion, that is not going to affect anything, but what is going to affect things is, how they actually behave, how they treat other people, their state of being, how they regulate their emotions, right?
Yeah.
These are the things that are actually high stakes. They actually matter to you. They're not frozen in time back in some desert somewhere that we have no connection to, linguistically, ethnically, everything else for a lot of people. So we have to develop this more practical approach. And I would encourage, I encourage other Christians to think about this and to look at all the different early Christianities that were so bizarre. I mean, there's so many bizarre branches off of that early tree. So it's like, we can't forget about that, because they all thought that they were correct, right? They all thought that they were. So I guess it just took some state authority, some Roman official somewhere, right? Or to sort of let you know what God really has in store for you. I mean, so that is really silly, but that's kind of the exoteric worldview that we're dealing with. I mean, I think if you have enough experiences, if you're well read and you've met enough people of different worldviews, you quickly understand that God is for all of us. Nature is for all of us. This is why I focus on universal principles, high stakes universals, because none of us is counted out of the universe. Clearly, obviously.
Yep.
Whatever the parameters are that apply to one person, they have to apply to everyone else. And if salvation is dependent on having the correct opinion, then we're all screwed. It's all for naught,
Yeah, it's a crapshoot. And I think that's actually, I want to hit on that point that you said, is that it's not so much about the idea that you then say, I'm a Christian, or worship Christ at your deathbed, but by your works we shall know them. Is that even you can tell a person in their practice by looking in their eyes, by seeing their skin, by seeing how they hold themselves in their body, by seeing what their health is like. And so there's a lot of these different, it's like, why would I want to, let alone follow, which I don't think anyone should follow anybody, which is why, which is really harsh. And I always am crapping on gurus and different, people like that. But it's the idea is that, like, why would I read a book from somebody who isn't a direct image of something that I would aspire towards? You know what I mean? It's like, we all know know what a dark sorcerer looks like. We all know what somebody who's like a car salesman at my door, a Jehovah's Witness or whatever, that kind of ideal. If somebody's trying to sell me something that they in themselves don't believe, it's like when you look at somebody in their eyes, you can tell if they have a clean soul or not. And it's like, okay, I can now converse or listen to this person, and then maybe I can parse through my own ways of thinking to see if what they're saying fits or follows suit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I mean, I think some people have a better sensitivity there, and some people can read that a little bit better. And sometimes it takes being betrayed before you those kind of red flags, you can become sensitive to them, which is fine. Like, honestly, go out there and make mistakes and get betrayed, because you will learn a lot.
Yeah.
I think you know what I'm saying. Don't take that too literally, but
no, take it literally. Go get betrayed, because I think it's important that everyone feels and experiences those things, because this path isn't all love and light. It's not what everyone wants you to think. And I think I even posted it today. I can't stand people who use the term shadow work, because it's like, I don't think they don't even know what they mean when they say something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion. Some of it is unfair around the love and light thing right now. Yeah. It's like, everyone wants love and light, they're missing the whole point, etc. But like, there is a place for love and light, but it's sort of we take this descent, and then we realize all of these terrible things. We're exposed to the darkness. And then as we come up, we realize, okay, love is one of the fundamentals. That is, like, because it's terribly difficult for some of us.
Yeah.
I mean, I know for my partner, it's not difficult for her at all. Like, love is just exuding, right? And it's like, and there's a wisdom there that, intellectuals, I'm too active up here. It can take a lot for me sometimes to just bring it back down to those more simple understandings. Yeah. But it just, some of us require like a lot more failures before we can gain these higher understandings. And one of those understandings, I think, is actually love and light. So if we see someone behaving like that, we shouldn't think, that they're naive or something. I think that would be overstretching it and incorrect. Because like, once you can arrive to that place where it is a little simpler, and you can just love more things and people unconditionally. Yeah. There's wisdom there. There's wisdom there, and we need as much of it as we can get. Right. So I think the naivety is thinking that like everyone can arrive there without the challenges, without the stress tests. And it's sort of, I think that's part of why we're here to understand the darkness. We're here to experience the darkness, possibly in a way that in other dimensions and other places, speculating here, possibly in a way that, is sort of impossible in a lot of other places. Experiencing the darkness to the degree that we do here, it might be rare. Part of why we're here, I is kind of my thinking on it, is that so we can understand the darkness, stare at it in its face, realize that it exists within us as well, and then to correct that and to prove through our life experience that, taking the more positive route, being compassionate, spreading love to others, spreading positivity. These things, like, it's a shame that they sound so cliche, because I put these are as high as it gets. These are the most, this is what we all want to arrive at. So if at the end of your great practice and your great journey, you're this jaded, pessimistic, dark, brooding individual, something hasn't worked. Something hasn't worked, right?
If you end up like George Carlin or Bill Hicks, even though they were brilliant men, hilarious, great insights, they were as jaded as they come. I think Carlin said the reason he's such a cynic is because he was a broken idealist. So,
I sympathize with those guys. Like, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. I want to kind of hit back on the ideas you were talking about earlier about the Pymander, and how all of that, when you were talking, really makes me reflect on what Dame Frances Yates was writing about in her Hermetic traditions and Giordano Bruno's work. Did you dig pretty deep? I saw you have some work on Giordano Bruno. What do you think of all that?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't I don't necessarily call it like a legitimate Hermetic tradition or whatever. Like I think clearly they there was different streams, right? I mean, the sort of the Alchemo Paracelsus stream, they didn't have the Corpus Hermeticum to go off of. They had like the Emerald Tablet and these other all of the mentions of Hermes with the Christian fathers. They might have had the Asclepius document though, which is great in and of itself. So they developed a more alchemical and microcosm and macrocosm perspective about Hermes and Hermetic. So they brought in that microcosm macrocosm use of the and that got tagged with Hermetic, and then different like the Martinists and stuff like that started running away with that group of Hermetic. But when the Corpus Hermeticum came, then a lot of people it was a far more richer landscape, and it was more technical and philosophical explanations to grab onto. But yeah, Giordano Bruno, he was obviously understood. He understood the deeper perspective of Hermes as this inspirational. I would say this kind of, the writers who are used to getting in a flow state and have this inspirational creative force coming through you, this kind of the Vulcan intellect, this fiery reservoir of potential. They seem to understand, Hermes to his fullest. Like artists and creatives and inventors and so forth who understand that inspirational state of mind where your ego takes a back seat, time itself sort of takes a back seat, right? The overactive aspects of the mind, all of these take a back seat, and something else comes through, and it feels more powerful. It feels clear. It feels warm. It feels moist. It's like so. There's whenever I detect people who I think understand that state and they're also writing about Hermes, I'm like, okay, we found them. We found another son of Hermes who understands, right? And then, you had the muses, like the Greeks had the muses, and I believe all the muses had sort of one mother, right? Mnemosyne, I never know how to pronounce her name right. But the mother of all the muses. So they understood there was this creative there's this creative force that moves through you, and you can create certain conditions in your daily life and in your practice that allow this to happen more often, and it becomes kind of the muse and the genius of these writers and these creatives, right? So that I think is a true understanding of Hermes that does not have this severing between the Greeks and the Egyptians, right? Because where is the Greek Hermes, the trickster, the god with as many names and roles as has ever been tagged to any god? Where is that in the Corpus Hermeticum? It's like, well, it's not necessarily there, but if we broaden out and we, as this happened, we start using the term Hermetic more loosely, all of a sudden these archetypal aspects, they correspond, pretty neatly. And that's why Hermes is so dear, so dear to me, because it's this archetypal god, this sort of presence. It's not only a omnipresent force in nature, but at some point it may have been a kind of anthropomorphized entity in history somewhere that was tagged with the name. We don't necessarily know all of those elements, but the fact that it seems to attach itself to all of them is it's so rich. There's so much to be gained through it.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. So then the question comes into, I have two of them and you can answer maybe in the same little flow, is that Is the Thoth cult the same as the Hermetic cult of that time frame? And then also in that, answer me, what is an initiate then in that time?
Yeah, so we kind of, the evidence that we have of the Thoth cult kind of dwindles out like fourth, third century BCE. Then we don't get as much of it. And the writings that we have of that Thoth cult are they're very fragmented. We don't necessarily so it is terrible. You get this sentence that could mean two things. And if it means this one thing, it's like, oh, this is a mystical scribal priesthood who, are traveling to these astral realms, and they're teaching their pupils how to navigate the underworld, right? But then if you interpret it another way, you get this kind of drier interpretation, right? So they're, not as firm ground to stand on. But we know that the House of Life, where these Thoth priests and initiates, the different House of Life, they stored vast amounts of scrolls and texts and everything. So it was definitely a kind of scribal tradition. And they veiled a lot of they had these Fight Club terminologies. They veiled a lot of their different terminologies, so you don't necessarily know what they're saying all of the time. Possibly all of the time, you don't know what they're saying. It's really hard to piece out. But that group definitely existed. And if you can use like Manetho and Zosimus of Panopolis to sort of fill in the gaps, you realize that there probably is this link between them and the Greco-Hermetic, cult that everyone's sort of looking for, and that we get in the writings of the Corpus Hermeticum. And I would argue that Clement of Alexandria gave us a pretty good outward depiction of one of their processions. They clearly had a lot of writings, textbooks on all of the arcane arts and sciences: astrology, medicine, alchemy, theology, right? The songs and hymns of the priests. It was a complete package. Everything. I mean, there was probably a architect somewhere in there. I mean, it was so complete that you wouldn't have had to have looked anywhere else. But the fascination is also how far back did that go? Because Thoth is so ancient. Yeah. Thoth is there at the very beginning, right? He is there. He is the civilizer of Egypt as far as the myths and the legends go.
Right.
So we'll always kind of be left in mystery as far as like, what did Zep Tepi look like? What did the time where the gods walked amongst? Was it really these other entities walking in the flesh with and a lot of people want to scoff at that and push that to the background and interpret gods solely in the omnipresent archetypal kind of aspect. I think there's room for both. There's room for euhemerism over here, which is that the gods were humans all the time. And then there's room for kind of the Jungian psychologizing of what the gods actually were. We get both. We get the people who worship these gods discuss both at different times, and they disagree about it. So I don't see that us disagreeing about it today is improper. It's not anything new, right? Yeah. So I think I stand on the side that the Greco-Hermetic cult that was producing the Corpus Hermeticum, those writings, that they were a carry through of a more ancient Egyptian Thoth cult. I think that there's evidence to show that. I know that we're speculating a little bit when we say that, but I'm so comfortable putting myself in that camp.
Yeah, and you're not the only one in that camp. I was talking to Dr. Heather Lynn when I was on the Occult Rejects, and she was on there, and her book, The Anunnaki, I haven't read it yet, but in our conversation, I basically laid it out there like, so do you think that these Anunnakis, Enki, Enlils, are they, they are the gods, but are they just us who survived the great, the great flooding of the planet, the Younger Dryas period? And she was all like, yes, I think so. And so you're not the only one. I think that too. And I think there are a lot of people out there, let alone Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, and all those guys who are willing to say that. And I think it's also important to know that if we, use the maxims as above, so below, or even the idea of Plato in his, in the Republic and all these things, is that we are but a mirror image of the divine. And so why would there not be these more higher the chain of being, as John Dee was always talking about in the Renaissance magicians? Obviously, why can't it be both? We don't have to be stuck in that Aristotelian worldview. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It wouldn't take much to shatter the kind of institutional approach to history, that big narrative that has been constructed. And I mean, I think it's already been shattered, but clearly there's always this like 40% of humanity, or maybe it's less, maybe it's more, that only does it does what everyone else does. As soon as there's this critical mass and it's like, okay, the UFOs have always been here, they're real, let's move on. Then
Right.
that 40% is going to immediately jump right in, and it's going to be like, gosh, we were wasting our time for years trying to get you guys on board, and it took some politician to tell you that it was true before you just trusted other people. Before you trusted your neighbors. I mean, it's like, go ask your neighbor about the orbs in the sky. They might have seen them. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
you would be so surprised. They might have, your neighbor might have many ghost stories, right? So there's so many things that happen that shatter the sort of materialistic paradigm. And then there's these things that happen, like, giant skeletons found in the mounds that, no one can get their remains. It's like, so people entrenched in academia, you might not want to go there, but I got nothing to lose. I have I got like, I'm not going to lose my tenure or something through just talking about what I want to talk about and where the mysteries, actually are.
Yeah.
And then you get into, I mean, I think just recently there's been some talk about Anastasi I, this sort of ancient Egyptian papyrus, like 3rd millennia BC, discussing the Shashu giants that were in the Levant region. And there's a relief, there's an ancient Egyptian relief that anyone can look up. And it shows Egyptians with 2 giants as their prisoners, and they're kind of like beating them, and they were spies apparently. So the idea that they were larger hominids, like, that is everywhere. That's prevalent as well. It's just it's just we just don't have the remains that we needed to make this. We did, apparently, according to over 200 newspaper articles from the late 1800s, early 1900s. We did at some point, but it's like, this is what I'm saying, that all it takes is sort of 1 or 2 things. The pygmies, like, we're kind of, okay, the hobbits, sort of, they did exist. We're catching up on that. So we're going to catch up on these other things too. There were 8 to 9 to 10 foot tall beings. And if you get a tumor in your pituitary gland that produces more human growth hormone, we already have modern cases of people becoming, having gigantism or something.
Yeah.
So we know it's physically possible, right? And these are just little examples. There's 100 of these examples that they start shattering these cute and cozy little narratives, these comfort zones that we've built around. And it's time to just shatter all of the comfort zones, to flip it all on its head. The hard problem about consciousness is not that how did consciousness emerge from the material world? It's the opposite. It's the exact opposite. It's like, no, why did universal consciousness create this materialistic experience, right? So that process of flipping things on its head needs to happen in so many different areas, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's a book that kind of, I already was thinking a lot of these things. So I'm very Platonic in my thinking. Like, I believe in the remembrance, not that I'm ever learning anything, but I'm only ever remembering things. I'm having that epiphany of like, oh yeah, I've always known this. And it's The Secret History by Mark Booth. I don't know if you've read it. I highly recommend it. He's basically doing just that in this book, where he's stating how all mechanistic, functionalistic history since Cartesian and maybe even before, they've been trying to make us think that materiality was first, and then consciousness stems from that. And he's all like, but that's the great Oz, right? That's Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. We must understand that actually what's going on is it was first consciousness, it was the idea, and then everything stemmed forth from that. And once we get that great switch, once we finally revert what has been inverted in our human history and consciousness, then all of the pieces of everything will start fitting together, all the signs and the symbols that you're actually finding and talking about in every video essay you put out there. And so that actually leads me into my next question, and getting back to actually what I do want you to define through all your work, what is an initiate? But then at the same time, please tell me then at the same time, are all of these individuals that you're talking about, are they heretics? Is this a heretical thinking that you're putting out there?
Well, so as far as the second question goes, it really just all depends on your definitions of what's heretical and what isn't. I don't agree with the idea that there is this firm body of evidence or tradition that creates like, this is the truth category over here and everything else is heretical. That smacks of low stakes dogmatism for me. So if I need to be called a heretic or whatever, like that's fine. I'm sure a lot of the individuals I cover to the more dogmatic perspective, which I don't think is that many people. I think it's a smaller category than some people might think. I don't think dogmatism. It's unfortunate that some fundamental dogmatists have taken positions of power and then they can use that, right?
Right.
So yeah, I'm not really too worried about the heretical part, but I do think if you find yourself a good Bruno, a good sort of heretic, like they're fun, they're good, even if you wouldn't even want to drink a beer with the guy, it's still they made their mark on history, and there's a reason why. And if you look into them, you're going to learn a thing or two. Now, as far as the initiate goes, what makes an initiate? So I also am kind of run contrarian to other people in this regard, right? Because some people are very adamant about you need a master, or you need the mentor figure to bestow the initiation. Okay. Now, I don't disagree that is a valid initiation, that there is initiations that can happen that way. But when I'm thinking for myself, when I'm thinking selfishly about what would I want to actually achieve an initiation or classify as an initiation, it wouldn't be symbolical or allegorical. It would be a more numinous, direct experience, right?
Yes. Yep.
And that can't always be bestowed, or can never be bestowed by a master. These are more internal workings, right? So in the initiatic traditions that work, where your brotherhood, your sisterhood, your master can produce in the candidate that experience, then both of those things coalesce perfectly, right? But they don't always coalesce. You see what I'm saying, right? There can be these physical institutions, even Masonic bodies, who do initiations, but they don't necessarily get to the real thing of what, for instance, what I am terming an initiation. And I go back, I would also say that, there's some foundation for this being an initiation as well across the Western esoteric tradition. I'm not just standing on an island when I say that you can be an initiate by yourself in the woods. That doesn't mean you're alone, though. That doesn't mean you're that doesn't mean you're self-initiated.
Yeah.
There's other powers involved. Would you say that the 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 initiate in the Poimandres isn't an initiate because his priesthood wasn't there, bestowing him some degree or something? No, he's an initiate because he had an experience, and the Poimandres, the entity, bestowed this on him, right? So that would qualify as an initiation that lacks that sort of other human being as the master figure. So, I think if we're looking at self initiation in terms of an individual can have a mystical experience, across any of the different ways you want to stretch that term, and then kind of be an initiate. It doesn't mean like shout from the rooftops that you're an initiate. I just think that does qualify. And, Synesius of Cyrene would agree with me. I believe Timarchus, who went into the cave and had his experience, he probably didn't leave that thinking, he didn't get initiated into something, right? So there's room for debate about that, but yeah, I think you see where I'm coming from there.
I completely, and not only do I see it, I agree with you. I am one of those people who have had my own. I'm not in so I'm not part of any lodge or anything like that. But I have definitely had my own levels of initiation, amongst the trees or in my own cave of the apartment I've been in, or, like these journeys. And I think a lot of people have. I do also agree that a good mentorship and a good teacher are really important so you can understand the signs and symbols as you're entering into these journeys. Other than that, and a lot of times people get lost in the visions without a good philosophical background of understanding objectivity, which is then why at the academy Plato had it, unless ye know geometry, you cannot enter into, this area. And so I think you're pretty spot on. Just to kind of re-up what I was saying is that self-initiation, I think, is actually really important in a day and age where we can't trust institutions. And so I have a problem with, and I know there are people out there, I chat with them, you chat with them, that are real, it's really important. I mean, I love the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. I love Freemasonry because of the things that I have garnered from them. However, I mean, look what happened to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in the early 1900s with the craziness of MacGregor Mathers and Crowley, and then this super infighting where they even had to go to court because they thought everyone was fighting magical spells at each other. And then all of a sudden these lineages break down. And so it's like my inner Ronin. I have this rebel who's like, I don't know. It's really tough, because it's like, how do I know that what this person's imparting upon me isn't also part of their own psychomelodrama? You know what I'm saying?
Mm. Yeah. So I think the strongest argument sort of to say like, well, you can't always be self-initiated is the idea that not everyone can have a profound vision and then know who to bring it to, or know what comes next. Some people can, though. Some people seem to have some innate ability to deal with these things, and then there's experiences that the meaning of the experience is inherent. It is telling you what it means. It doesn't require some dream interpreter over here that's going to give you, if you bring your dreams to someone, you're going to get such a variety of interpretations. Like if you look online, you're going to get all this variety of interpretations, but you are going to have those rare dreams that comes fully packaged with the meaning, and it tells you exactly what is going on, whatever it's foreshadowing. So, it's a case by case thing. There's not these blanket. This goes with everything. There's not these blanket generalizations that apply to everyone. There's always going to be those exceptions. There's always going to be people naturally endowed with some kind of mystical capacity that is going to arrive in their life, maybe when they least expect it, maybe super early on, maybe really, really late. We're not the ones who control these kind of things. So if you think that you can always control it, then you can gather around yourself, a group of people, and then you bring the candidate in, and you have the ritual and the ceremony, and then boom, they're initiated. But what if they didn't get initiated? What if they didn't have a transformative experience? What if they don't even understand the allegories, right?
Yeah.
Then
yeah.
it's like they're just an initiate on paper. So there's always this, we need to look at it at a case by case, basis, and realize there's a lot more nuance to this discussion than just you can't be self-initiated and you have to be, there's not those polarities there. There's more complexity. So it's worth, it's worth inquiring deeper there for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Especially one of the books that was huge in my life and my journey over the last 20 years has been Manly P. Hall's Lost Keys of Freemasonry. And I actually go back to it, and I go back to it over and over again because of how he breaks down the 3 degrees of Masonry. And in there, he directly associates and talks about how not all those who go through the Blue Lodge initiations are actually initiated into the Great Blue Lodge of the astral realms. And I think that's going to exactly what you're talking about and what I'm talking about. Even though, you yourself, which is leading my next question, you yourself are an initiate of Masonry. Are you a Master Mason?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, so this thus leading us into this beautiful lecture you're going to be talking about. But one of the things that I want to bring us into is you did a bunch of work on the Eleusinian mystery schools, the lesser and the greater mysteries of Demeter, Persephone going into the underworld and coming back out, as well as you've done a lot of other work on the initiations throughout the ages. So do you think the Masons have kept and held the lineages of the adepts through the ages, going all the way back to maybe even what we were talking about with Zep Tepi in the pre-Younger Dryas periods?
Short answer would be no. And the more drawn out answer is that as far as the symbols and as far as the symbols go, and the basic interpretations of those symbols, and the plethora of writings that the early influential Freemasons left with us, in that regard, the spirit of, let's just say, the ancient initiatic, schools and so forth, and what the best of the ancient mystics and philosophers were getting at, that has definitely been maintained. Now, depending on where you look, it's like maintained stronger in this case, weaker in that case, right? But it's there. There isn't. So there are a lot of Blue Lodge Masons who don't necessarily have an eye for any of the esoteric aspects of Masonry in general. And part of my work in Masonry is showing that esoteric aspect has always been there since the very beginning. And, I demonstrate this through different orations in the 1730s and so forth. I got a video coming up on like the earliest surviving oration in America in a Masonic lodge that we have our hands on is profoundly esoteric, and it's comparing the lodge to the heavens, and it is describing a kind of collective great work. So I think the collective great work, this kind of, let's just call it the returning to the golden age, I see that as another esoteric layer of Freemasonry that is difficult to get at because it's not very overt, but it's there. And guess what? There's all these other early Masons also agreeing with that and fleshing that out in their writings, right? So, you have, in the same decade, you have Chevalier Ramsay in France over here, and this unknown orator in America over here, prior to the revolution, both talking about how they come out of these esoteric strains and there's this mysticism involved, right? Both mythicizing and, attaching themselves to one or another myth, whether it be the Tower of Babel over here or like the Knights Templar Crusaders and whatnot over there. And then they're also making these symbolic sort of, that the physical thing that you see in the lodge has this astral and heavenly perspective. They're also making those interpretations, right? And then they're also, which you can piggyback from some of these Enlightenment ideals, Renaissance things attaching to it. There is clearly in early Masonry this movement to create a collectively better future, collective welfare, right? Happiness for all mankind. And this is what Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati grabbed onto. He stole whatever he wanted from Masonry. All of the initiates in the Bavarian Illuminati had to be Masons first and whatever. So they borrowed whatever they wanted. They also borrowed the thing that one of their goals is going to be to create happiness for mankind, right? So these things were right there in the beginnings of Masonries, and it's worth reminding modern Masons that they exist. Pointing them to the sources that they're fleshed out in, and it's just it's part of the broader conversation that needs to be had in Masonry right now. So it's exciting.
Yeah, that is exciting. So then what I want, I feel like it's, even though I'm not a Mason, I think one day I will become one. I just got to figure out, all the little details of those things. But what one of my missions is to help kind of separate the nonsense, the wheat from the chaff. There's a lot of people, especially in the zeitgeist of the conspiracy world, that want to say the Masons control the world, Colin. Are you one of those Masons who is trying to control the world?
I missed that train. I don't know when it left the station, but I wasn't able to find myself in that particular that particular train. So, anyone making those arguments, they just haven't shown me the person. Like, Nate, give me one. I'm begging you. Like, I'm begging you to just give me one Freemason who is in charge of any global political anything, right? I mean, sure, they've been presidents here or there, but the presidents, those guys aren't really controlling anything. That's a whole nother discussion. But
yes, exactly. As we hear in The Venture Brothers, which is an amazing adult swim cartoon everyone should know, the president is not the president, Samson. You know that. Okay, continue, Colin.
Yeah. Well, it's like, have there been Masons that preside in, spheres of power and whatnot? Sure, there definitely is. But Masons are not exempt from the thing called human nature. I mean, that pervades every society that there ever was. So there's going to be, I've met fraudulent Masons who practice fraudulent business practices, right? I mean, right. And then there's a bunch of people in America in these clandestine Masonic lodges that are basically, they just pretend to be Masons and they charge like outrageous fees, and they're scamming a lot of people right now. So that's a whole nother thing. It's a mess. And but with a lot of these online, chatterbots out there, they've already made their conclusions. They don't necessarily, they're not really saying, here, I'm open-minded to like learning more or figuring out. They've obviously already made their conclusions because there's no evidence to stand on, anyway. And even if there was, like, now, are there cases like in Italy and in different places where there were definitely like Masons who were involved in the mafia and stuff like that? Yeah, dude, that stuff's out there. But
like pay due, right, is what you're talking about.
I've lost all those specifics there, but I know John Dickey's The Craft. He's not a Mason himself, and he takes a kind of a biased approach to Masonry. But you get some things from the critics and skeptics here or there. But he shows where there have actually been these kind of, I guess, movements involving Freemasons that some people died in the process. There were some negative results. But does that extend to the broad Masonry everywhere? No, it never really can. So it's just, if you're going to make these arguments, like, just do a little bit of work. Just do a little bit of work, and then you might get some attention. But just screeching, Mason's bad, that shows that you don't even know who's really running the show in the deep state and in the actual shadow world. If you think the Masons are the guys doing it, then it's like, oh my gosh, the guys who are doing it are telling you that they're doing it at the forums around the world all the time. Like, you don't need to search into the crevices of, ancient potential conspiracies to figure out, who's pulling the strings, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's good. Can you speak to us all about how much do you know about Albert Pike and his dogmas and morals?
Yeah, Albert Pike, man, that was one of the first. His Morals and Dogma was one of the first like big comparative works that
Yeah,
I sunk my teeth in,
yeah,
and I
it's
mean that was
brilliant.
one of the
I
first
agree.
books.
Yes.
Yeah, and I know like he was a Confederate general, so everyone has their nitpick there. But I don't, I don't think that this, I basically, like when I was reading Morals and Dogma, I shed a tear a number of times throughout that book just because his writing is so moving and so powerful. And while he may have made a number of comparisons that don't hold up upon scrutiny, he fleshed out the entire esoteric sort of outlook of Freemasonry that most of the later American Freemasons kind of dug into a little bit more. And everyone, there's no esoteric Mason in America who hasn't tried to look at Albert Pike
Yeah.
very, very closely, because clearly he was onto something, and he had so many realizations with his comparative work that do hold up to scrutiny, and you see what he's getting at, and there's value in those discussions. It's like him and Manly P. Hall both make that mistake of saying like, this god or this figure is that figure. They make these
Right.
one-to-one
Yes.
equations, and it's like, maybe that you used to be able to do that. Nowadays, these days, you can't really do that and maintain your credibility. You want to
Yeah.
have some evidence to go off of, but the bulk of his work, as far as he was digging into all of the different ancient religions and the different schools, and showing Masons how to look at um, their own symbols, their own degrees, their own rituals, their own myths, and see how it corresponds with all of these other ancient religions. And in that regard, he did beautiful work, possibly, work that no one else has been able to sort of trump or even tried, because who wants to do what Albert Pike did? It's like he already
Right.
did all of it, right? So we have to figure out something else. But yeah, Albert Pike, I was fortunate enough to see some of his statues, and like I went to DC and saw some of his personal paraphernalia, some of his own books and his own belongings and stuff like that. And he did profound work. I mean, he translated all these different Sanskrit texts. So he was on a mission. He was on a quest, and his early poetry when he was younger is absolutely brilliant. I mean, he wrote a poem. I know I'm going on a tangent on Pike, but he wrote
Please.
a poem about Hermes in his 20s that it's like, ooh, he got it. He got it,
Yeah.
And so it's just, yeah, it's cool to see that. And yeah, esoteric Masonry as we know it today would not be the same without Albert Pike. Now Albert Pike is so colossal of a figure. He is like a center of gravity that if you focus too much on him, you lose the other esoteric Masons that were doing work somewhat similar to him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is why, at the lecture I'll be giving in Asheville, I'm focusing on Chevalier Ramsay, this French Freemason, right? He was Scottish born, traveled into France, was attached to the exiled Stuart dynasty. In his 20s, he's writing these beautiful mystic poems, right? And in his earliest writings, he's digging into the esoteric layer of the pagan religions, and he's also professing a kind of universalism and a sort of collective well-being, to the rest of the world. There's a lot of those elements that he was already writing about before he became a Mason. And then kind of at some unknown time, probably in the 1720s, he becomes a Mason, and then he gives this famous oration in 1736. And in that oration, he is the first figure in Masonic history to claim that the Crusader Knights, he doesn't say Templars per se, but he claims that Masonry came out of the Crusader Knights, that, you know, came back from the Crusades, right?
Okay.
So all of the guys sort of using Knights Templar in this kind of like no, barely any writings of any Knights Templar actually survive. I mean, to try to like
Right.
to try to figure out what, if anything, the actual Knights Templar had, that apparently some secret thing in Jerusalem, it's extraordinarily difficult because they don't just come out here and tell us, right? So it exists in this kind of legendary space, you know?
Yeah.
But anyway, he becomes a source of that. And he's also, I've been, some Masons have argued against me on this point, but insufficiently, I would say. Chevalier Ramsay was the first Freemason to directly equate the ancient mystery schools with Masonry, right?
Oh.
Yeah, very important link there, and that doesn't mean that he's the only one that figured it out.
No, of course
More
not.
so, it represents that in early Freemasonry, that was kind of in the background, because if you were this extremely well-read and educated person at that time, if you had read the classics and you read all the descriptions of the mysteries, you would have realized, and you were also a Mason, you would have realized, oh, wow, there are these similarities. You know, these people are not telling us about their rituals. Masons take vows not to tell anyone about their rituals. There's many layers, you know, that say like, oh, this is very similar. So then you get the more, you know, extraordinary arguments that blossom out of that try to create these physical links between the ancient mysteries and modern day Freemasonry. I don't think that those physical links exist, and I don't think they have to. You know, I don't think that they have to. The same spirit is captured. And it would be a little materialistic to try to think that everything has to have these physical links, right?
Right. Yep. And that's,
you know,
the problem of perennialism, right? Would you state?
You would have to explain that a little bit more. But let's come back to that. Let's come back to that.
Yeah.
So Ramsay gives this brilliant oration, and, you know, clearly demonstrates that he has a more universalist approach to religion, even though he's a Catholic. And he sends this oration off to one of the king's, you know, Catholic advisors, Cardinal Fleury. And, you know, Ramsay is asking, like, what do you think about this oration? You know, if His Majesty King Louis XV endorses Masonry, that would bring a lot of nobility into Masonry, and it would be great for the society. You know, I've had many interactions with them; they're great people, etc. And the story goes that Fleury wrote on the margins of the letter, "His Majesty does not wish it." Right. So, a lot of Masons think that this is when Ramsay's Masonic career ends, because he followed the sort of dictates of the king and the Pope. But we don't necessarily know. We have nothing that says his Masonic career really ended. Did it probably slow down? Did it take a different direction? Definitely. But what we do see is that Ramsay is recognizing the kind of importance of the universalism going on in Masonry, how it attaches to these ancient mysteries and all of their different symbols, how it can create, quote, a spiritual empire around the world, right? So he was touching on all of these ideas that are now in the zeitgeist of esoteric Masonry. He was touching on them in the 1730s in a way that Anderson, who wrote the Masonic Constitution, never did. You know, Anderson was focused more on a biblical approach. So what my work with Ramsay is showing is that prior to him becoming a Mason, during his times where we know he was a Mason, and well afterwards, he held on to his fundamental, you know, spiritual orientation, which was more of this universalist approach. And that's why in his 1,000-page magnum opus, you know, it's a huge comparative effort to show that all of the other religions and even the indigenous groups that the Jesuits, you know, were bringing back reports from the Native Americans and so forth. He was trying to translate Chinese, like actual Chinese manuscripts that were being brought back. So he was comparing Native American mystical experience with Chinese cosmology. I mean, he was doing things that were kind of unprecedented at this time. Yeah, and so awesome. It's the idea that I'm showing is that universalism is fundamental to Masonry because, of
Yes.
course, you can be any kind of religion you want and join, right?
Yep.
And it's not only fundamental, but we need to focus on that in the present day as kind of like an argument or a foundation, like a bedrock layer of what the point Masonry is trying to get across. I think that universalist point is special, and we should focus on it a little bit more. So Ramsay becomes this person who represents that point very, very well, and he was doing things that Albert Pike did, basically 100 years later, right? And just everyone's kind of neglected him or forgotten about him. So he's a fascinating figure there.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I think it's important that you help bring that work back. What year was he doing his work in?
So that oration was given in 1736 or 7, and he wrote his philosophical principles of natural and revealed religion in like 1746 or something. It was published after his death, probably because it was pretty controversial. And I didn't mention this, but the first papal edict against secret societies occurred like 5 to 7 years, maybe even sooner, after Ramsay's oration. And so, and it was, by the same Pope and the same king, the King of France, signed off on it as well. That extended into France also. And so the idea is that Ramsay, for better or for worse, some people say, well, his oration failed because it caused this huge backlash. And the first papal edict against Masonry, that guess what? We still have a papal edict against Freemasons till this day. So Ramsay may have been one of the first guys to affect that. That's pretty cool. It's just cool that those things like are timeless like that.
And that goes back to the heretic thing, actually, I think quite well, is that then he seems to be a heretic, not in Freemasonry, but in the, to the Catholic Christian religion of that time frame, where he technically is speaking very similar truths to what Christianity is trying to spread, even though that's the Christians, the exoteric, his work is in the esoteric. But I think that it's kind of similar to today. Is what is a psyop? Anything that you can't speak upon. There obviously are higher agendas and narratives trying to squash truths that then tell humans the human condition and what is our spiritual birthrights. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I mean, in particular, he became the secretary for Madame Guyon, who was the famous Quietist mystic. So Quietism was like this Christian mystical movement in, the early 1700s. And Madame Guyon was one of like the primary figures that got caught up in this controversy. And one of her friends and mentors, and Ramsay's primary mentor, Fenelon, this French, Catholic. So Fenelon comes to the defense of Madame Guyon's Quietism. And Fenelon is the mentor to Ramsay, and Ramsay becomes Madame Guyon's secretary. And in his biography of Fenelon, he wrote the life of Fenelon. He takes pains to defend Quietism as well. This, let's just call it a heretical, Christian mystical movement. But so it touches on both of your points there. Yeah. But Quietism in and of itself, all the Quietists who were essentially just saying you're going to find God and his love through quiet meditation and, a number of other things, but that was the basic idea. And they were going back into the earliest church fathers, the early Christian mystics, and of course the New Testament, and finding places that support that kind of Christian mysticism. And that's what they were arguing against when there was this big backlash against the Quietists. They were using all of that to argue against it. So it just shows how throughout the history of Christianity, these different mystical subsects pop up. And, sometimes they get a little out of control. So the authorities have to rein them in and, send them to prison, put them in some tower in some castle somewhere and lock them away for a few years, because apparently, like you say, if the psyop is what you can't talk about or whatever. Yeah, but these people weren't trying to talk at all. They were trying to stay quiet.
Yeah, that's fantastic, actually. Just to hit on the point I was trying to make, I do like perennialism. Obviously, you can see it all over not only my books and my work and stuff like that. But there is one thing that I think has gotten away from us is, especially like reading something like Aldous Huxley's Perennial Philosophy, is that obviously there are spiritual truths that reign through most religions and secret societies and magical societies and cultures throughout the ages. The one thing that I want to state is, yes, there is the movement through time as one is helping the other out grow itself. But there is also this thing, and I actually heard Dan Trell talk about it, the modern Hermeticist, is that actually it's okay for things to pop up around the planet out of nowhere as well, because that then also helps us understand that these things are actual signs and symbols that stem from the human unconscious itself. So it doesn't have to be one group, helping and spreading this thing to the next group, and then you have this direct line through time. He actually called it something that I can't remember what it was exactly, but I do like it that we can have these two different ways of thinking about how the universal truths and the secret mysteries through the ages can be spread across the human condition.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with Dan Trell's The Dark Side of Perennialism, and I think I love Dan Trell's work. Like I would love to meet him. Totally respect and honor his work, but I fundamentally disagree with a lot of the points that were made there. And because it's like, all right, it's just what you were saying. All of these different things can pop up around the world, and the kind of argument against universalism and perennialism attaches to this kind of as well, is like basically no matter where you find a human being, there are these fundamental principles and experiential components to what those principles are that are usually going to crop up if they have some idea and some kind of organized religion or spiritual orientation. So, my work in universalism is like, that's the entire argument, is showing how these universals are the fundamentals, whereas the particulars are there are particulars. They come out of the different cultures. They come out of these specific and isolated places. These people don't make the same kind of sacrifice. Their chants are different. They don't sing while they do this. They don't wear this particular clothes. They don't eat this particular food, et cetera, et cetera. Those are these particulars, and they're low stakes. Okay. So I think academics focus far too much on the low stakes.
Which is the nominalism, right? If I'm hitting that correctly, that's the nominalist worldview.
I'm not sure, just because my definitional memory is so terrible. So,
it is. That's the nominalism focuses on particulars, universals on the big truths. Go on.
Okay. Well, basically, there is no particular without a universal, and this is the problem.
Yes.
It is not this. It is this. The universal is this overarching thing. The particulars are all down here. So I wrote, 3 substacks on rethinking universalism, defending universalism, what universalism is, and perennialism is kind of tied up in this as well. It's not to say that like all the mystics everywhere, of course they didn't have the same experience. Of course they're going to have different minute opinions on the different minute things. But overall, there's the fundamentals and the universals remain. That's it. That's the only point. It isn't this extraordinarily long-winded thing that you need all of this extra, proof to show. And what I'm trying to do is not only make those claims, make those points, show where the evidence exists, but also show which figures in history were coming to that same realization. Okay, just like we just talked about with Masonry, that's fundamental to the beginning of Masonry. They've always been doing it ever since. That is also in, like, I mean, oh my gosh, pick someone, right? You've got Megasthenes, I believe, who was the first Westerner to write a description of India. He says the Syrians, the Jews, the Brahmins, they all talk about divine knowledge and they think about divine knowledge in the same way that we Greeks do, right? You have Synesius of Cyrene arguing before Emperor Arcadius, making the same point about how all the nations regard God as being good and have morality as a fundamental aspect to their religions, right? Cicero's on divination. You have, divination is practiced on all of the countries that he knew of, right? Different forms of divination. Did one school interpret a dream through this lens and another through that lens? Of course. That is the particular. But did they also believe in psychic dreams and believe in prophetic dreams? Yes, and that is the universal. You see what I'm saying? So
I do. And I agree. I do agree.
Yeah, we can make the perennialist argument without sacrificing the particular. And you can, the specialists, God bless them, the specialists can show us those particulars, but they don't need to say the universals don't apply. And I discussed this with scholars and whatnot about how like the universal is always there. It's always pervading. That's why it's universal. If it can't be described as being universal if it isn't, right? So that's what they're missing when they think that, oh, this particular thing over here, renders that obsolete, right? So it's this. I get very excited about this, because I think we need to reframe it, and I think if you're even slightly dogmatic in the term of like in your religious dogmatism or your academic kind of, we need hard evidence, right? But then everyone disagrees on what the evidence actually means, so you don't even know where you can find this solid point. And they can get a little dogmatic as far as like the materialism goes, and they need to apologize in their books for 30 pages before they can actually get around to getting to the point of what their research and what everything is, because they're trying to define a term for like 3 pages, and it's just like, I know what the soul doesn't require 3 pages to be described, right? This because in its fundamental, more universal aspect, we're talking about the survival of consciousness after death. I mean, that's what we're kind of getting at when we're using the word soul. And it's something that can leave the body even while you're still alive and come back to it. There's all these different things. So if this person calls it something different over here, they call it something different, they call it something different. Well, their soul, does different things when it leaves the body. This soul does different things. Those are the particulars. But what is the universal? It's that an aspect of our consciousness, a point of view awareness of our consciousness can leave the body. That's the universal there, and that it survives physical death. So when you get lost, my motto is, when you get lost on the margins, come back to the fundamentals, right? Because they're always there waiting for you. They're always there waiting to inform you. We can get really, really, really far out on the edges of these particular things, and then we spend a lot of time trying to be correct about these minute things, which can be worthwhile. And like, you should be interested in what is actually going on, the truth. But yes, the universalism is a subject that's dear to me. Yes.
Yeah, no, as it should be. And I think that's really important, especially in this postmodern world we live in, that we are so focused on particulars and the syntax and all this craziness that we're forgetting about the wider scope of things. I think we can see it in our lack of meaning, in our deconstructionist worldview, which we've been left by Derrida and Michel Foucault and all these characters who then throw away the soul. They've thrown away the reason our Western civilization has gotten to where it is today. And that then leads me into such a fascinating video you've done. I can't remember if it was recently, but I actually just listened to it because it's something that keeps coming back to me in this strange America that we live in. That is, even I think today, Trump came out and started talking about how we're bringing God back into the United States, which I think is actually quite important. However, you make a great argument against the United States as a Christian nation. And so I do recommend everyone going to that video and checking it out, because it can really reframe the idea of what the forefathers were trying to do, since they were all deists and Masons themselves. But can you give us a short little overview on that, and then kind of mix it into how it can actually help us have this, that we're not stuck to a Christian worldview, and that's not actually what the melting pot of America is?
Yeah, for everyone who actually wants to learn about this, there's about 20 minutes of essential reading that you should do. You read Thomas Jefferson's The Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom. Take you 5 minutes to read, and then read James Madison's Memorial and Remonstrance Against Religious Assessments, right? So if you just those two, those are the two documents that the Supreme Court has referenced when it comes to religious freedom, et cetera, because those two documents were key in bringing the policies of religious freedom first to Virginia, my home state, and then they influenced the First Amendment of the Constitution, right? So, were the majority of Americans and colonials Christians? Yes, right, and that is the one fact that that makes a pretty strong argument for the folks that want to say we're a Christian nation, right? However, we are not a Christian nation in the sense of the nations in Europe that everyone was leaving for reasons of tyranny, reasons of religious persecution, reasons of we can't freely think and discuss, what we want. So to say America is a Christian nation is to throw away the thing that makes America's religious policy important to begin with. Yep. And it's to throw away all of the history that led to that, because it was a fight. I mean, after the Revolution, the Anglican Church was the establishment church in Virginia, right? The Anglicans in Virginia tried to bring back the establishment tax and the religious assessment tax, these taxes that if you weren't an Anglican, you had to pay a different tax, and there was limitations on you and whatnot. They tried to bring back all of these restrictions, but meanwhile, you had these Baptists, Christians also, right? You had these Baptists saying, wait, you guys recruited us into the revolution kind of with the argument that we were going to be able to practice our religion freely, right? And then you had the more well-read, educated kind of deists, if you will. That term is kind of loosely applied as well in some ways, but it nonetheless fits. So you had all these different movements. So why was it then that that Baptist Christians made it so important that there was no policy of dogma? There was no policy of religious belief, because that policy had created so much turmoil in the recent decades and the recent centuries. And that is part of the American argument, is looking back at all of that turmoil and saying, we're doing something totally different. And this isn't just, feel-good speculation. The founding fathers were brilliant writers, right? And they wrote all about this stuff. I mean, if you read Thomas Jefferson's Query 17 and his notes on the state of Virginia, he gives a whole thing about religion. And now, him in particular, he wasn't inclined into this kind of mystical esotericism or anything like that, but he was a brilliant statesman, and he understood why the kind of strict dogmatic religious policies had always failed, and what America was going to be able to do that was totally unique, right? So all these generalized statements, America was founded on Enlightenment values, America was founded on deism, all of these things they're flawed, right? We can't make these general statements at all. But it's basically each of the colonies had establishment churches, and those establishment churches, after the Constitution and after these religious policies started coming out of Virginia and being adopted in the other states, they got rid of the establishment churches. So it was this disestablishment movement, not a we weren't lugging the same baggage across the pond. We were getting rid of the baggage that we needed to do something totally unique. So, that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I flesh it out pretty at length in my essay and in
You
the
do.
other Virginia's Fight for Religious Freedom. So it's not to say that there's not still room for the debate. There always is, but I think it's pretty clear that the founders did not want to reinstate religious tyranny into America. Quite the opposite. And it's just a shame that the Christian authorities in so many European countries that were Christian countries, because they had establishment churches, right? And the church and the state were combined at that level. They gave us the evidence to show that this is not what we are going to do moving forward. We're going to do something different. So to say that we're a Christian nation sabotages that difference. It gets rid of that difference.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's really important for a lot of people to know in this day and age. So again, I think everyone should go over to your channel and check out those videos because they're fascinating. Then I want to ask you, from that kind of conversation, is how do you then bring God back into a country that is godless?
Yeah, I don't. We're not entirely godless, but I get exactly what you're saying, right? How do you bring it back? Well, excitement is the compass needle, right? Like follow your excitement. And if your excitement honestly isn't leading you to some spiritual orientation, like follow it somewhere else if it's true and everything else. Because guess what? That is what I believe your spirit is. That's how it communicates with you. It's through these things like excitement, right? If you can get excited about the idea that we are immortal souls, that God loves us, that spirits and angels and different entities exist and they overlap with our world, that belief and those beliefs have been fundamental to the human story since we ever had a story. If you get excited about those things, there's something in there. There's something in there for you. And there is many, many, many lifetimes of investigation and study and experience that you can do to just enrich that orientation, right? So how do we bring it back? Well, the thing is that people need proof, right, these days, right? It's not enough. It's not enough to just have a good, eloquent, sermon on something, or to get someone really excited about a subject. That isn't going to be enough for everyone, right? So in the most fundamental sense, the individuals that make up this country have to have experiences that confirm them and that alter their kind of conclusions, or at least give them a higher conviction level, right? If we're not going to say they have, I fundamentally believe this. Well, my conviction level is increased about these things, right? So if you're totally averse to those experiences or the things that are usually necessary to induce them, sometimes they don't need to be induced. Sometimes you have a car accident and you leave your body and, oh my God, your whole life changes. Let's not throw that out either. Everybody in esotericism seems to, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people in the esotericism want to throw out modern near-death experiences. Apparently they're too cliche or whatever.
Right.
But this is also a problem, right?
It is. Yes.
So, basically, if you need proof, well, the evidence is strong in the favor of non-physical reality and a consciousness that is fundamental and that pre-existed prior to our life and will go on. That evidence, I think, is firm, and it happens in all of the different parapsychological cases and studies that have been done. But parapsychology doesn't get any funding. Okay, war gets funding, right? War gets, death and killing gets funding. The soulless aspects of our society get funding. And then our taxes go and pay for all this stuff, and we don't really blink an eyelash anymore. And so these God-given natural rights that America should be focused on, those natural rights, they've been trampled on once again. So some correction needs to happen. But to bring it back to your point, some individuals need an experience, right? Can psychedelics offer that in a controlled and safe setting? They definitely do. They definitely have. Can you be all of a sudden surprised you weren't looking for this experience and it comes to you? Yes, that happens, and it can happen. Can you train and practice and create states of being that, you know, can result in certain experiences that sort of confirm these things? Yes, that can happen as well. So it's like, you know, which of these things excites you as an individual? Because if you've already drawn your conclusions already, I mean, you're already setting yourself up for failure. I mean, everything could change. We could get proof of telepathy. We already sort of have it. We could get proof of telepathy tomorrow that's blessed by the authorities that you put your actual trust in. Apparently, you don't put your trust in yourself, so you externalize your trust, right?
Yeah.
And then once this authority figure tells you to do it, then all of a sudden you draw this conclusion. But it should come from your heart. You know, it should come from some kind of emotional and, you know, individual orientation. You know, it's like that's why the seekers in this area, the seekers usually find it. They find it, and you know, when they don't find it, the sign is on their faces and in their pessimistic writing that they haven't found it, right? But you know, my caveat to all of this is that you know, be careful having all of these constructed belief systems about things and all of these conclusions and whatnot, because reality starts reflecting our belief systems, you know. And if we have so many of them, if we become so rigid in all of these belief systems, well, you know, the angels can't speak to you like this because you have to do that and that. You know, this 100 different subjects we have these cute little belief systems about. And now our reality is starting to reinforce these conclusions and reflect those conclusions, right? And we may not, you know, we might be just putting up blockers against these more spontaneous moments and these other numinous experiences that can come that are totally beyond your calculation and your planning and everything else. They're going to surprise you. So it's like you can simplify a lot, even in your practice, in your meditation practice and everything else. And like my practice is very simple. That's why when some people ask me if I have a practice, you know, I'm almost like, well, you know, I've been hesitant to formalize it until quite recently. But yeah, it's like be careful about all of your conclusions, especially if they're these negative conclusions. If they're this can't be possible, that's not possible, that's not possible. Well, it's always been the case for humanity. We've always seen ghosts. We've always apparently people are always interacting with spirits over here. They have these wild encounters. They leave their bodies. You know, so what is that? Like let's inquire deeper into that. And hey, let's use all of the modern tools in our toolkit to study it. Let's do all the rigorous studies. Let's formalize all the training and everything like they're doing at the Monroe Institute, so people can come in and get these experiences. So the work is happening, and I don't think it's going to happen at this like huge, you know, epic scale all at once. It's really it's a game of individuals all moving forward on this huge chessboard. And like once enough of them have moved sort of into the light, there's no going back. You know, there's no going back. But it's like, you know, once again, we're here to sort of explore the darkness, to understand it, to figure out that it exists within us and that we can stop feeding it, and that you know, to not feed that dark side of us is probably what we all need to learn and practice until we can get into this next stage. So, you know, when the world is on fire and the politics is going crazy and there's all these wars, that is a reflection of where we are at in our, you know, collective consciousness. I truly believe that is a reflection.
Yeah.
And you know, once we start pushing out something different, we're going to get it reflected back differently. But guess what? All of the demons are going to have to come out to get processed before, you know, we can march into the age of Aquarius or whatever, however you want to put it.
Yeah, no, that's good. And again, it's something that my lady always is reminding me in the Lotus Sutra of the Buddhistic practice is that you're in a house that's on fire. All you have to do is walk out. And it's as easy as that. And I think that goes back to the simplicity of maybe the practice, your own practice, and just not getting so muddled in all the muck. It's like, just sit down and realize that that you don't have to be what's the point of being a social justice warrior if you don't figure out what justice first means for yourself, and even what social apparatuses do you even want to give your energy towards? Because then it leads us towards this whole thing about just giving away our loosh, right? Giving away our energy. Because if you are continually out there trying to protect the world, how do you even know, and not even understanding how to formulate your own protective circle, or understanding that you need to breathe right. And it goes back to what, now that I think about it, but in Lost Keys of Freemasonry, Manly P. Hall talks about, is he says, if you don't even know how to use 90 to 100% of your own lung capacity, can you even call yourself human? And that kind of struck me myself, just because I'm a martial artist and kung fu practitioner, where it's like you're continually trying to integrate body, mind, breath in your martial art practice or kung fu practice. And then it's not enough to just leave it in your practice. You practice, so then once you're in the world, all of your practice actually works in the world. So you're consciously breathing there. You're able to slow your mind. And so to go back to the idea of get out of the burning house, is that at any moment, no matter where your anxieties lie, you can just step outside of that by hitting that inner practice, which is the point, right?
Yes. I RTB, return to breath, return to breath.
Ooh, I like that. Stealing that.
Because the house fire happens in here.
Yes,
exactly. And it's like, this is why I say, like, I'm not anyone's guru. I will never be your guru. I will never be anything. If I can share something with you that you find valuable, that's great. But I'm not here to tell you, what to do. If you come to me with a question, I'll try to give you my best answer. I am also sort of averse to that. Like, I want to have teachers and mentors, because I'm willing to sit here and listen to someone I believe has something valuable, but I don't believe in this sort of like superiority thing. But yes, back to the return to breath. I mean, it's like we can get lost in the abstractions of all of these discussions so far that we forget our breath. We forget our breath all the time. We always have to RTB, return to the breath. And that's my first, as I'm formalizing my practice to just share to others, maybe it works for them, maybe it doesn't. Returning to breath. That is the first protocol. And then you do 5 seconds inhaling through the nose, 5 seconds exhaling through the nose or the mouth, right? And then you increase that. And you do it 8 seconds, you do it 10 seconds. And then you can get to this point where your inhales are so gentle and subtle, and you are inhaling for over a minute. And your exhales, you don't have to exhale that long. You can exhale all of it like that, but play with it. It's about you build those little 5 inhales, 5 exhales, 5 times, kind of like you're going to the gym, but until, like, you don't always have to, you can go back to that to ground yourself, but then you can play with it. You can do your own sort of breath work, figure out what works for you. And that's the thing. It's like, being able to play in these spaces is important for some people, not always having this kind of coming back to these rigorous things. And then you increase to the visualization and the sensation. So now when you've balanced yourself out with the breathing, now you've stifled all of the anger and the frustration. And even though your mind is still wandering a little bit, you can like ignore the monkey or catch the monkey, or right. You can do that a little bit better. You can quiet it down, return to the breath. And then you can start deeply sensing into places in your body and visualizing whatever works for you. Let's say visualizing an etheric fluid, a white light, taking a visualization of the sun and just imagining its energy, and then shrinking it down into a pinprick, putting it into the place inside of your body that hurts or is congested or needs a bowel movement. And if you keep it there and you make it flutter, and your breathing meanwhile in the background is holding steady, you are going to get results. You're going to feel things happen that you are influencing. They're not just your shallow breathing automatically. No, you're conscious breathing. You're consciously visualizing and sensing deeply into your nervous system, and you are making things happen inside of your body. And so that is like the base layer of my practice, and sort of the practice that I'm trying to share is coming back to that base layer, because it might not sound too sexy and abstract and esoteric and all this stuff, but no matter where you are, no matter what spiritual tradition you're practicing, this is a universal thing that is going to work, right? You're regulating your breathing is going to work. There's no debate about that, right?
Right, exactly.
So this is why I like coming back to these things that are fundamental and they work and they apply to everyone, right? Because there's a truth there, that hyper specificity and particularism, and this is my exclusive little bundle of knowledge over here that no one can access unless they're, initiated. That's what, like, I'm not as interested in those things, right? I'm interested in bringing us back to the universals, and, because people are in need of it, desperately in need of it, right?
Yes.
If you're deep in esotericism, like you're probably going to be fine. You're going to find what works for you. Like, I don't want to just be talking to, the esoteric guys out here and gals. I want to talk to the regular average people, or the people that are suffering, the people that are seeking, the people like the younger versions of myself that didn't have any place to go to learn about this stuff, or to figure it out, or to get fascinated and interested in it. And like, if we can do a little bit of that, we've done so much, that's a success.
No, that's beautifully said. Me and a buddy figured that out a long time ago. And even my girlfriend and I, we talk about it a lot. It's that, it's hard to, it feels like there's not the same, we're not in the age of masters, right? Even though there are people in the mastery of their own temples and things like that. But I feel, maybe you feel the same way. It sounds like you do. It's like we are instead becoming the masters we always wanted. It's like how becoming the teacher that you always looked for. And what I mean by that is not the teacher like the guru, but as Bruce Lee called it, I am but a signpost guiding the way. I'm just pointing the way that helped me. And upon that, I've got this brain, nervous system, body thing, mind thing that I can take in a lot of stuff. And then once I'm in conversation with normal individuals who aren't as divinely mad as we are, that then we can pick and choose the little bits of information that feels best in amongst of the normal mundane conversations that happen. It's like, oh, that's okay. How about we just start breathing from the gut, and then you take the full in breath, and it's kind of exactly as you're talking about it. And I find that to be brilliant and refreshing, especially out there where it's in the occult, new age, spiritual community. There seems to be a lot of people who are more charlatans and sophists, where they're trying to be like, no, do my thing, and that's how you'll be healed. It's like, that's no.
Yeah, and that's why the best people that are pointing the way, it's like that way, you have to participate in that way.
Yes,
that way is not just carved out for you to walk with no struggle and no thought. You don't have to do anything. Here's the way. Just believe in this and you're good. Just give yourself to this and you're fine. There's a lot of people selling everyone on that, but it's like your participation is required in this game of life. And that means bring forward what you love and what makes you unique. Like what is inside of you that you just have to get out. And maybe you've buried it behind 10 years of 9 to 5s and whatever it is. Maybe it's buried into your childhood and you have to unearth it again, right? But if there is a way that works for everyone, everyone is going to participate in the way in their own unique way. That's the universal and the particular, right? Yep. As particular as things get, beautiful. They get as particular as the individual, right? And that is, we're all individuals. Okay. The thing, I'm probably not going to learn French in my life. Someone else is going to speak French and figure out how to translate the French guys or something like, everyone has something unique and something to offer. And there's, I say this, and then I do hear some people are like, well, I don't think I have anything unique. I don't think I have anything different or special to bring to the table. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. It doesn't have to be this big, grandiose sort of thing. It can be very simple. If it excites you the most to do anything, call your friend, do some silly arts and craft, make up some, even designs, like whatever it is, pursue that, and then do the next thing, and then do the next thing. Even if it's nonsensical, even if it might mean eventually quitting your job that you hate, like you should answer the other calling, because it is going to fast track you through certain things that otherwise, if you don't listen to it, it's never going to come. You're never going to get to walk through those valleys of darkness, because sometimes we have to do that. We have to abandon the institutions, say the way that they've been doing it is screwed up, because look at all the drug addicts. Look at all the people taking meth every single day just to function at their job. Look at how broken all of these systems are. Look at how scammy the insurance companies are. There's a million different ways to demonstrate that this base layer society that we all think is so sophisticated and everything else, it's shattering, and it has shattered you. It has shattered you as well, but it doesn't have to. You have something to say about that. And, let's just say the universe is desperately waiting for you to rise and to say, you know what, enough is enough. I'm going to chart my own course in this way. I'm going to do something that I actually love to do, and be true to myself. I mean, and that feels good. It feels good. It might be scary at first, but if you get through it, you realize that nervousness was just excitement. And now you do it again, you do it again, you do it again. And now you become more confident. Now the things come easier. Now you're trained in it and you've practiced in it, and it just becomes a part of you. So you don't even remember the person who was so buried in there, and all of your excitements and passions were so closed in. You've become something totally different. You've transmuted the lead into gold, and now there's a new path going.
Nailed it. And that's exactly what I was going to bring up, is that you're laying out the alchemical pathway of how to create the philosopher's stone. It's not in being the chemist with the Bunsen burner, but you are the chemist, and you are the Bunsen burner, and you are the leaden dross, and you are the gold. And exactly what you're talking about is how you extract the gold from the leaden part of your human nature to get to that immortal divine part of yourself, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
The gold in you is a thing that cannot rust or tarnish. It is something, and I do believe that it is something. There are unique traits and skills and aspects of individuals that only they can bring forward, right? A puzzle isn't all the same piece. A puzzle is every single different piece differently, and that's what makes the whole. This is the great work of Freemasonry. My interpretation of it is, you have the pyramid with the missing capstone. The capstone is, the all-seeing eye hovering above it, right? So, and every Freemason is a rough-hewn block from the quarry, the rough ashlar. And you have to use the working tools to perfect this ashlar. Now, you are a block, and no one else is your block. Everyone else has their own block that they have to bring to this temple. And only when each block is chiseled to its proper dimensions, actualized to its purpose, only then can that block make its way into the universal temple, right? And that is the same analogy here. And only until all of the blocks of every individual have come to the temple can we fill in that gap and unite the Godstone, the all-seeing eye, to collective humanity. So that is sort of the great work, I believe, of Freemasonry. And that's why, you can stand on some of these more simple things, like bring to us what is unique in you. That is the way.
Beautiful. That's yeah, I completely agree. Nice. That's beautiful. There's something else I wanted to kind of bring up because it's something that I've been trying to figure out actually, and it seems like maybe you figured out it in one of your video essays. It's so I myself have a Chinese kung fu style practice. I intermix it with a lot of different mixed martial arts, but my love in the embodied practice is the kung fu system. And yet I am wondering, where is the Western esoteric traditions warrior system? Colin, can you finally answer that question for me?
Oh man, you said it was possibly answered in one of my videos. Now I'm just curious what you're talking about.
I feel like there was a video you talked about the warrior's way of the Western esoteric system. I can't exactly. I listened to it, and there's something there. And so even if it wasn't in any of those video essays, do you have in any of the vast knowledge that you have a warrior tradition? Maybe it's the Knights Templar, maybe it's the Crusaders. Why is there not an embodied practice in the West?
All right, yeah, this is a serious issue, and I talk with my brother about this a lot because he's sort of struggled with the Christian worldview, etc. And he's like, it doesn't, the body, that you discard the body from it, right? And I think that's really what we're getting at here, is that broadly the Western religious mindset has cast away the flesh, and it is no longer holistically included in what a spiritual practice is. But there is no body without the spirit. I mean, the matter is just crystallized spirit. It's just densified spirit. The binary doesn't exist, but the vertical orientation that exists, right? The idea that as the higher we go, the higher the vibration, it goes into a different octave. Literally, the higher the vibration of the sound, it slips into an octave that we can no longer sense. So there's reasons that language is good. But yeah, the body needs to be taken into account, and Christianity has not been able to provide that. The Knights Templar haven't been able to provide that. I mean, the Masonic Knights Templar it's an aftershoot. It's a it came in the 18th century, and they created the first Knights Templar degree, I believe, is like 1747 or whatever. It's not an actual like physically connected to the order of warriors. And I don't think the legitimate historical Knights Templar, like, I don't want to be one of them, literally. I don't want to kill people, right? I don't want to do that. So the warrior aspect, now it has to transition into the internal combat, which is every mystic's warrior. That's the real warrior path, is the internal combat. And that is the recognition that inside of you exists the worst monster that any human has ever become. Somehow or another, that same being, the same aspect, the same mindset, the same crooked deformity, the worst monster that has ever existed out there in humanity also lives in you as well. And God bless your soul if you never have to awaken it or anything like that. But sometimes life brings you a scenario where you're brutally betrayed, something terrible has happened, and a darkness wells up in you that you did not previously know to exist. You have thoughts, you have very terrible negative thoughts. You might have slip into a kind of psychosis where strange negative thoughts are blasted at you, and you just, you don't know what to do with them. Well, the Stoics had a great way of dealing with these kind of things, right? If an impression is just an impression, if it's an impression that you don't want to associate with, you let it come in and you let it go right back out. You don't have to identify with it, right? But if you have taken on these negative mindsets and these deep, the emotions of fury and revenge and everything else, and lust and envy, that is going to create this residue, this oxidization that has to be scraped off, right? So that's not to say, we can't wear our scars proudly and learn from them, but this is the learning This is the learning process. This is how you learn from the darkness. You recognize that it exists in you, that it was your fault. There might have been other people around, but hey, we are, if we did not have a belief, we would not have the corresponding emotion. Okay.
Right.
Every emotional response or action has to do with a belief. Maybe it's an unconscious belief. So you have to figure out what beliefs that you have that you didn't even know you had. That's, that's like shadow work. That's what real shadow work is. Right. And so it's like, agree. Oh my God, why did I get, and I'm not exempt from any of this stuff. Like I'm a human just like everyone else. So I'm keenly aware of this. Why did I become such a monster when this person said that to me? What belief, what insecure belief did I have in myself that made me respond like that? Right. That's the hard work. And that is the sort of real combat that we need to do. Not going forward in our anger and, being obliterating the enemy out there. It's like, no, we can, through this internal combat, we can become a greater thing, and we can figure out why the darkness has been placed in our life. And in a way, that's part of, as a lot of great mystics have said, and a lot of different thinkers, that's part of what we're doing here. This is a learning experience. And, real learning results in a change of behavior. The difference between knowledge and wisdom is a corresponding behavior. So if you've taken on all this knowledge and there's no difference in your behavior to something better, that has never progressed to wisdom. Wisdom is actually learning from what we know and bringing it forward, and that is true gnosis. That is true knowledge.
Beautiful. No, I agree. And the video I was thinking about was the Greco-Roman combat magic, actually.
Okay.
That I was listening to, which is a fascinating listen, and I think it's really important. And I think almost to me, it's like the West, through the Christian dogmatism, the negative Christian dogmatism, what they did is they basically trapped that Western tradition, basically of embodied practice. They trapped it underneath the Vatican, and they hid it away with everything else cool about, Western Christian mysticism and stuff like that. So that's my own conspiracy, I think. But
you can't discard the magic. I mean, where is Jesus not performing his miracles and everything else?
And just what I was saying is that it's like a fascinating thing where I think I really think the Vatican has trapped away most of the embodied practice of the body. Kind of what you were saying that you and your brother were talking about is that I truly do think that. I think that a lot of the things that seem to be missing, that because of the secrets have been locked away because of the Inquisition that appears throughout the ages due to the Black Iron Prison. I think that a lot of these things go away. I mean, even in Chinese history, they've banned Chinese Kung Fu, their martial practice, over and over again, and then it's had to come up in different forms, and now you get that modern version of wushu, which has lost all the magic and actual combat science of what an actual traditional kung fu practice is. And so I think the West has done something very similar to that personally. But
well, it's hard to sell all of your products if you're actually championing the things that we need to do to keep our health and everything else in order. I mean, clearly we've sacrificed so much for profit in America. It is very, very disgusting. But, I think that all of the darkness, when all of the darkness starts creeping to the surface and it makes itself known and makes itself apparent, that is a sign of progress.
Yeah, nice.
And that's the difference. It's a sign of progress because more and more and more people are becoming aware of the darkness, where it actually exists. That is light shining on previously undiscovered darkness, right? And that's this whole process. And collectively, we're going to be seeing more and more and more of that. If you think it's dark now, there is going to be more and more things Yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
agree.
getting crazy out there
It's
right
getting
now. Oh my
crazy out
gosh.
there. Yeah, and it's exciting. Everyone out there, I truly am excited in these times. I feel like everything that I've thought the world is, and it's only going to get crazier. And that then goes to my thesis that magic is everywhere, and the media is trying to tell us that the world is more fictional than we could ever imagine, and that reality, even though it has objective truth to it, is as flimsy as like currently as it's ever been, due to the increase in information that we're getting right now. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, the math checks out. It's like we've sent, there's so much money that governments around the world, America especially, has just thrown into these black abysses that no one gets anything from, aside from a small number of hyper wealthy and corrupt individuals at the top. And the thing about, like, if you're not a somewhat of a conspiracy theorist these days, then you are just pulling more blindfolds over your eyes. Like, it's so clear, and you're demonstrating you are unexperienced with other human beings, right? Because there are some snakes out there, and I've been on the biting end of snakes in my earlier life, so I'm well aware that these things can happen. But to not understand that there are intensely evil, corrupt, greedy, cunning individuals out there in places of serious power, that is just naive. That has never been the case. It has never been the case. There's always been tyrants shuffling out the herd to go die in some war that no one really ever cared about. They were, they're given propaganda, and here it is, but yeah, I mean, the idea is that we do live in a magical reality. Our thoughts and our actions have non-physical effects that are non-local. Okay, so it's not that everyone is doing magic everywhere. It's that we live in a reality that has magical effects, and magic. It is we live in a reality where our thoughts and our actions ripple across the cosmos, right? And there are techniques to direct more specifically these kind of energies and make specific things happen. Yeah, that's when we're talking about serious technical magic. But if you reframe your idea of just reality as a whole, that we live in this magical reality, then the evils that are going on and the goods that are going on, they're having this lasting effect, right? So what I think is happening is that we're going through this major transition period, but before that transition period can really happen, or how it happens, is through recognizing all the demons we've shoved under the rug and hidden in the closet, and everything, all of the lies that we've been told. All these things have to come to the surface, and they gradually are. And it doesn't happen in one full sweep, like a nuclear bomb getting dropped. It happens in a more like growing something in a garden. It takes care. You have to nurture it. You have to bring it up, and then then you get to figure out if it's rotten or not. If you need to plant more of something over here. But I was making a point earlier. The idea is that, to solve like the housing crisis, hunger, starvation, to solve these things, it only takes like a couple billions of dollars. It doesn't take that as much money as we fund like wars and all the black projects. I mean, trillions has gone missing. $1 trillion can feed everyone and house everyone. Like, it doesn't require that much money. But the government and these terrible systems, they know how to take a dollar hammer and make it $50. That's what they do. That's the only thing that a lot of these people do. These bureaucrats, you don't produce anything. You just comment on the thing as it's sliding past your desk.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, man, so much is going to happen in our lives.
It's exciting.
I always say this, and why do you say this every time? But whatever happens, it won't be boring. We have that going for us. We have that going for us. We're in a very exciting time.
Yeah, nice. So my question is then, to be the final question, how can the Western esoteric tradition that you so brilliantly plot out in your on your channel, American Esoteric, how can that help us in this day and age?
Yes, well, we have to think about what is happening for us, and what we are going through has happened to so many other humans in the past. All of the human beings that have ever existed have existed on the same world as we have, with the same parameters that we currently exist in. And if you're seeking the truth, the chances are very high that other people have been seeking that truth as well, and that they've made pretty good strides, right? So when it comes to mysticism, esoteric philosophy, trying to understand all of the different categories that extend from that, whether it's like, what really are the spirits and the angels? What did the ancients have to say about that? What is a mystical experience? What is, the idea of the soul leaving the body? What happens when that happens, right? What do we see? What do we encounter? What does it feel like? What does it show us? Well, when you look back into the past, you realize that people from every location, speaking any language, in any culture, are also having experiences and also seeking these kinds of things. And it's just a part of the learning experience. We shouldn't discard our ancestors who have done so much to get us where we are, right?
Yeah.
And there is just a rich trove of brilliant ideas that are still relevant, and there's ideas that were fleshed out in the ancient world that we are still catching up with. Of course there are, because we've discarded the soul and divinity of reality. So we're still catching up to the ancient world and in those aspects, right? I mean, one example, how can the Western esoteric tradition help us these days? It's like, well, you look at Synesius of Cyrene, you look at his On Dreams treatise, right? And he gives you techniques of how to remember your dreams, how to attract more phenomenal dreams, and how to prophecy through dreams. And they work, they actually work. It's not just he's
Yeah.
not just speculating about this. And he's teaching you that this is a natural form of initiation, a natural form of divination. But it's a good exercise to study these things, because you're just informed. You're informed on what has been lost, on what has been discarded as well, right? And don't think for a second that you can't you can't like learn something that's really relevant to you through all of this, or just sympathize with someone who's like a tortured soul in the past, because us philosophers, many of us are tortured souls in our own way. So
Yeah, yeah,
so yeah.
definitely. No, that's a great answer, and I completely agree. To not, for us all to not get lost amongst the muck and realize that we have a treasure trove of history, practices, individuals who have tried and succeeded in breaking themselves not only free from the system, the matrix, the empire, but broken themselves free from their own mortal coil, and then not only traveled amongst the stars and the celestial, but then came back to their body and then told the story of their doing it. And it's not that they're special, but it's that they just sat and did the practices or had an extraordinary experience and then wanted to tell the people about it.
Yeah, and this is clearly demonstrated in the modern near-death experience literature,
Yep.
and everything else, which is like the modern tools that exist in hospitals that can resuscitate people have allowed for that kind of literature to become so vast. And then if you take this and you compare it with the legitimate but somewhat rare, just because of not all the texts and everything else has survived, near-death experiences in the ancient world, well, you get these categorical universal similarities. In the particulars, every experience is different, right? Of course it is. That is the obvious thing.
Yeah.
I would say the unobvious thing, apparently now, because we like to separate and categorize everything obsessively, is that these universals have been confirmed across time, and the brilliant minds of the Western esoteric tradition have been confirming them as well. And renaissances always grabbed what was the greatest from the past and brought it forward and said, remember, right? So that is this process, right? We have to remember what humans have been through. We've been through a lot of these. It looked different. We had different technology and everything, but we've been through it all before. Tyranny is as timeless. The history of politics is the history of tyranny, right? So you can learn things. You can learn, what did they do in Byzantium when, this jumped guy took over the throne and just started, casting out all of the ancient families and doing all this horrendous stuff. Well, in one case, they stormed the palace and kicked the bastard out, right? It's like there, so there's these lessons, all of these lessons to be learned. And here we are again, taking our own journeys, figuring out learning the same lessons, but in our own unique way, in a way that can work for us today. So, the idea is like to find the best of these schools of thought, to find out, and to honor what they've left behind and all of the work and all of the sacrifices that they've made, and figure out how it realistically applies today. That is the tricky business. It's one thing to zoom in really far onto this like teeny little aspect of something that only scholars really want to talk about because it helps them, right? And then it's another thing of like bringing this into practical reality and bringing it as a salve to the American spiritual crisis that's going on. And that's American esoteric right there.
Beautiful. That is beautiful, Colin. Thank you so much for such a fantastic conversation tonight. And that was a great way to wrap that up. Please, you've got a lot of stuff going on, not only with American Esoteric, you have a Substack, you have a lecture coming up. Please plug all of your things, because everyone out there should be, if you're not already following him, go over there, hit all the buttons, give it to me.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah. You can find me on American Esoteric on YouTube. All of my links are there. My Substack. Eventually, I'll be getting my website back out there. I've got some books in the works. I'm a writer, so there will be books. That is part of my constitution. And the more that these speaking events happen, I'll be sure to put them out. Follow me on Instagram. I do some more personal posts there as well. And yeah, that's it, man.
Well, thank you for coming on MagusintheMedia, Colin.
Thanks for having me. We had a great talk.
Yeah. Yes, we did. And we're going to have many, many more. When you write those books, I'm going to bring you on. I've already formulated a few ideas that I would love to have us do together as well. So I feel like in this zeitgeist of the esoteric and the globalization of all these things, I think it's not all that bad, because we can do this from long distance and still have a great conversation, no matter what kind of techno archons are trying to inhibit us from doing so. But again, this has been amazing, and I so appreciate you, my friend. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Pleasure to meet you.
You're welcome, Colin. Thank you, everyone, for watching this brilliant conversation. We have a strange day and age that we're living in, but just remember, it's not as strange as it's ever been. It's always strange at all times, and that's when we have to go back to the traditions of old, the Western esoteric tradition, go back to the alchemy, go to Hermetic traditions, be your own magician, find that inner warrior, become the king, queen, lover, magician, warrior that you always have been able to do. And make sure, if you like these conversations, subscribe, like, and share. MagusintheMedia is here, as well as American Esoteric, to help guide you through the strange times, because it's only going to get stranger. Thank you, everybody, for listening to us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.